Throughout Hollywood's long history of heartbreak and tragedy, the story of Veronica Lake remains one of the most devastating. She became an icon for her icy blonde hair draped mysteriously over one eye and for the cold, distant femme fatale roles that defined her screen image. To the public, Lake appeared calm and untouchable, yet beneath that placid exterior burned a fire far too intense to last. When her downfall came, it came swiftly and brutally. Like so many Hollywood starlets, Veronica Lake had to reinvent herself from the ground up. She was born Constance Frances Marie Ockelman in 1922 in Brooklyn, New York, into a strictly working-class family. Her father, Harry, worked for an oil company, and her mother, Connie, lived a modest, ordinary life. Lake's childhood was far removed from the silver screen until tragedy struck when she was just 10 years old. Her father was killed in a horrific industrial explosion in Philadelphia. Although her mother later remarried, moved Lake from school to school, and tried to carry on as if life were normal, nothing was ever truly the same again. Perhaps it was this early loss that led her mother to begin living through her daughter, setting Veronica Lake on a path toward Hollywood, a path that would bring both fame and heartbreak. Her mother was not only living through her daughter, but doing so in an increasingly extreme way. Connie pushed Veronica into acting despite the girl's strong objections and the enormous strain it placed on their relationship. Refusing to accept no for an answer, Connie even moved the entire family to Beverly Hills when Lake was just 16, convinced that her daughter was a star in the making. In 1940, both women were in for a harsh awakening. That same year, however, fate unexpectedly intervened. Producer Arthur Hornblow Jr. was searching for a nightclub singer for his upcoming film I Wanted Wings, starring William Holden. The moment Hornblow watched Lake's screen test, he knew she was the one and cast her in the leading female role. For Veronica, this felt like the moment everything would finally change. But before her career could truly begin, Hornblow made one crucial request. He believed his new discovery would never succeed under the name Constance Keene and suggested she adopt the name Veronica Lake instead. He explained that her eyes were calm and clear, like a blue lake, making the name a perfect fit. When I Wanted Wings was released, Lake was still a teenager, but her life had already taken a dramatic turn. Veronica Lake exploded into a full-fledged star almost overnight. Despite barely standing over 5 feet tall, she was impossible to ignore. As one reviewer famously noted, she was seductive, mischievous, with a delectable voice and manner. The hype around her was so intense that she was already being called the discovery of 1941 before I Wanted Wings had even been released. Yet while audiences were falling under her spell, few had any idea of the turmoil unfolding behind the scenes. From early on, problems began to surface that would only grow worse with time. Lake was notoriously unreliable and difficult on set. The tiny teenager already carried a big attitude, missing her call times so often that director Mitchell Layson finally ordered her to remain on set all day just so he could keep track of her. If Lake already showed signs of diva behavior, it only escalated from there. Ironically, it was during I Wanted Wings that a single accident would turn her into a household name. During one day of filming, her hair kept falling into one eye, creating an unintended peekaboo effect. Embarrassed and self-conscious, Lake believed she had ruined her chances. But producer Arthur Hornblow Jr., ever alert to star power, immediately saw something special and urged her to keep the look. What followed was nothing short of a sensation. Men were captivated by Veronica Lake herself, while women became obsessed with her hairstyle. The peekaboo look from I Wanted Wings quickly swept through fashionable circles and became synonymous with mystery and elegance, a legacy that still echoes today, immortalized even in characters like Jessica Rabbit, who famously sports Lake's signature swoop. At last, Veronica Lake seemed to be at the peak of her success. Yet even as her star burned brighter than ever, cracks were already forming. By 1940, the teenage actress was becoming dangerously distracted, and the forces that would eventually derail her life were quietly moving into place. Around 1940, Veronica Lake fell in love with art director John S. Detley, but it was anything but a fairy tale. Lake was only about 18 years old, while Detley was 14 years her senior and far more established within the Hollywood industry. Still, that didn't stop Lake from jumping in with both feet. She married him shortly after meeting him, and everything happened far too fast, a pace that would soon catch up with her. Following the success of I Wanted Wings, the studio immediately cast Lake in Sullivan's Travels opposite Joel McCrea, under the direction of hot-ticket romantic comedy filmmaker Preston Sturges. By this point, Veronica Lake was officially a star, and expectations for the film were sky-high. But on her very first day on set, her director was nearly left speechless. Throughout pre-production, Lake had kept a massive secret from the cast and crew. She was pregnant. By the time filming began, she was 6 months along with Detley's child, and it was painfully obvious. Whether out of fear of being fired or sheer denial, Lake had said nothing. What followed was explosive. As Preston Sturges stared at his visibly pregnant leading lady, his initial shock quickly turned into intense fury. He was so enraged that members of the crew had to physically restrain him from attacking the actress. In the end, Sturges was forced to creatively hide Lake's condition using body doubles, careful costuming, and camera angles. While he ultimately managed to pull it off on screen, Lake's behavior during the shoot was nothing short of nightmarish. By the time production wrapped, her on-screen love interest Joel McCrea reportedly vowed never to work with Veronica Lake again. He never worked with her again, famously quipping that life was too short for 2 films with Veronica Lake. Ouch. But behind that biting remark, something far darker was unfolding. Lake had never truly wanted to be a star, yet she drank deeply from the cup of fame, both figuratively and literally. Around this time, her alcohol consumption spiraled. Partly it was a way to cope with the relentless pressure of Hollywood, and partly because she reveled in the nightlife that surrounded her new status. The problem was, the nightlife didn't love her back. She frequently arrived for early call times looking exhausted, unkempt, and painfully hungover. And alcohol was far from her only vice. Although Lake was married and had children, she was hardly living a quiet domestic life. Instead of spending her nights at home, she fully embraced her celebrity, engaging in a string of affairs with powerful and famous men, including Howard Hughes, Aristotle Onassis, and Marlon Brando. Yet despite her many romances, there was one famous man who seemed perfectly matched to her spirit. He just wasn't her lover. Hollywood, however, has never been gentle with difficult stars, and once word spread that Veronica Lake could be sharp, volatile, and openly unpleasant, the industry began to turn against her. Cast and crew members whispered, then openly criticized. Actor Eddie Bracken, who had only briefly worked with Lake on the 1942 ensemble film Star Spangled Rhythm, didn't soften his opinion one bit. He bluntly labeled her a nightmare and insisted she had earned every bit of her reputation. Tragically, the months that followed would be so devastating that even her harshest critics fell silent. In July 1943, after giving birth to her daughter Elaine, Lake became pregnant again with her second child by her husband John Detley. Then, without warning, a cruel twist of fate shattered everything. While working on a film set, Veronica Lake suffered a terrible accident, one that would mark the beginning of the most harrowing chapter of her life. She tripped over a wire on set and went into premature labor, giving birth to a fragile baby boy named Anthony. He was simply too weak to survive and lived for only about a week. The loss was devastating. Both Veronica Lake and John Detley were shattered by the tragedy, and their marriage never recovered. They separated that same summer Anthony died, and the divorce was finalized before the year was over. Grief-stricken and lacking any real coping mechanisms, Lake quickly began making reckless decisions. Just months after losing her child and watching her marriage collapse, Veronica Lake married again, this time to film director André de Toth. She would later have 2 children with him, a son named Michael and a daughter named Diana. But anyone who believed this new marriage would finally bring her stability and happiness was sorely mistaken. Instead, chaos followed close behind. By 1944, Lake's star power was clearly fading. She appeared in a string of box office failures, most notoriously The Hour Before the Dawn, where her cold, unsympathetic portrayal of Dora Bruckmann and her widely mocked German accent caused audiences to laugh outright. That same year, her appearance at a war bonds event in Boston also fell flat, with one reviewer remarking that her talk felt grim. After a long, public slide, Veronica Lake had hit rock bottom. Then, in 1946, what seemed like salvation arrived, though it would prove to be a double-edged sword. Lake was offered a chance at a comeback in the classic film noir The Blue Dahlia. On paper, the project looked promising. It was the first original screenplay by legendary mystery writer Raymond Chandler, and it reunited Lake with Alan Ladd, one of the very few co-stars she genuinely got along with. Unfortunately, the rest of the production was a nightmare. Almost immediately, Lake managed to make a powerful enemy. Chandler, despite being a notoriously heavy drinker and having not even finished the script when filming began, was still deeply respected in Hollywood. Veronica Lake, however, had little regard for him, and didn't know him at all. Trying to sound informed without putting in real effort, Lake decided to research Chandler. Instead of reading his novels, she relied on gossip from the film's publicity director so she could comment on him to the press. This infuriated the volatile writer. And things only got worse. Chandler loathed Lake's acting, finding it empty and shallow. Indeed, he thought everything about her was vapid. He didn't bother hiding his contempt, viciously remarking to friends that she was only good when she kept her mouth shut and looked mysterious, and complaining about close-up shots of her that made him feel physically ill. By the time filming dragged on, the feud had become legendary, and Veronica Lake's fragile comeback was already starting to crack. Although The Blue Dahlia was a box office success, the brutal production process and Veronica Lake's explosive feud with Raymond Chandler cast a long shadow over her career, one that still lingers today. In the film's aftermath, Chandler delivered what would become the cruelest insult ever aimed at Lake, dismissively and infamously renaming her Veronica Lake. Yet as cutting as the insult was, it paled in comparison to the real disasters still ahead. By 1952, Veronica Lake's life unraveled in spectacular fashion. After a string of box office flops, her finances collapsed, and the IRS seized her family home over unpaid taxes. For many, that would have been devastating, but for Lake, it triggered a complete breakdown. She suffered an intense nervous collapse and abruptly abandoned her marriage in the most shocking way imaginable. Using a pilot's license she had earned years earlier, Lake took the family plane, left her husband and children behind, and flew solo from Los Angeles to New York. By her own admission, she was finished with Hollywood and willing to do absolutely anything to escape its judgmental grip. But this dramatic exit was only the beginning of a series of increasingly erratic and troubling choices. Over time, Veronica Lake faded into near-total obscurity, until 1962, when a reporter from the New York Post finally tracked her down. What they discovered was staggering. While the journalist likely expected to find a fallen star living quietly, nothing could have prepared them for the reality. The once glamorous Veronica Lake was working as a cocktail waitress at the Martha Washington Hotel in Manhattan, where she was also living under the name Connie de Toth. The revelation sent shockwaves through the public. Fans were heartbroken and began sending her large sums of money in support. News of Lake's situation eventually reached one of her former lovers, Marlon Brando. The moment he heard, he arranged for a check of $1,000 to be sent to her. This time, Lake's response was unexpectedly tender. Although she never cashed the check, she kept it as a cherished reminder of her past, even framing it in her home to show friends. For her fans, the moment felt bittersweet, painful, yet strangely heartwarming, a final glimpse of dignity and memory in the long, tragic aftermath of a Hollywood legend. Yet despite everything, that rediscovery did not save Veronica Lake. It quietly destroyed her all over again. After being found working in a cocktail bar, something shifted inside the former star. Once more, she felt Hollywood's irresistible pull, even after having narrowly escaped it. Within months, she gave in. Over the next few years, Lake returned to the entertainment world, taking on small film and television roles and releasing her memoir, The Autobiography of Veronica Lake. But something essential was gone. In Hollywood's image-obsessed culture, beauty is everything, and Veronica Lake no longer fit the mold. Years of heavy drinking had left her worn down, haggard, and looking far older than her mid-40s. One reporter who met her at the time cruelly remarked that she looked more like a cleaning woman than a former movie star. Although her autobiography expressed regret over not spending enough time with her children, her later interviews revealed a far darker truth. By the end of her life, Lake seemed unable to trust anyone, not even her own family. In one late interview, she chillingly stated that she would not cling to her blood, nor allow them to cling to her, explaining that she knew what her mother had done to her and refused to repeat that cycle. Veronica Lake had been profoundly damaged, twisted by years of trauma, pressure, and loss. Tragically, she would find no mercy even in death. In June 1973, Lake was still traveling across the United States promoting her autobiography when, while passing through Vermont, she was struck by violent and debilitating stomach pain. The tour was halted, and she was rushed to a local doctor. The diagnosis was devastating. After years of alcoholism, much like her film noir co-star Humphrey Bogart, Veronica Lake was suffering from advanced cirrhosis of the liver. Doctors gave her only weeks to live. As had so often been the case in her life, Lake received little more than the bare minimum. In early July 1973, exactly as predicted, she died from acute hepatitis. Throughout her life, Lake was haunted by the belief that she lacked talent. She once bitterly joked that all the talent she possessed could fit into someone's left eye without impairing their vision. Harsh critics like Raymond Chandler only reinforced those insecurities. Yet others in Hollywood disagreed. Director René Clair, who worked with her on I Married a Witch, insisted that Veronica Lake was deeply gifted, but tragically, she never believed it herself. She was one of Hollywood's most tormented stars, and years later her mother revealed a devastating explanation. According to Connie, doctors had diagnosed Lake with schizophrenia at a young age, which she claimed explained her irritability, mood swings, and erratic decisions. Many now believe her destructive drinking was a form of self-medication, a desperate attempt to escape not only Hollywood's cruelty and her own insecurities, but the torment inside her own mind.